Jack pushed his new task to the back of his mind and decided his priority was the document he had brought for Jonathan. He handed it to his boss, explaining what it was, and then he moved on to other matters. So because you're flying to Cuba tomorrow, shall I push your international video conference forward to tonight? Yes, please. And inform the upper echelons of the Sumoko Corporation to prepare the data in advance. Of course. Jack nodded and left Jonathan's office. In 2 days' time, Xavier and Esther's engagement party was to be held in Cuba. Jonathan and Nancy were due to fly out the day before. Meanwhile, in Cuba, the Williams family had made all the necessary preparations for the upcoming engagement party. The Sloanes had decorated the waterside pavilion with flowers and a red carpet, and everyone was in high spirits. Oliver had still been receiving regular treatments for his burns, and his face was beginning to heal. He slowly removed the mask he wore and looked at himself in the mirror. The scars were still visible, and he touched the pink ripples that crossed his cheeks. He estimated that it would take another 6 months for the skin to completely recover. Dr. Shaw had told him that the skin was ready to tolerate a light layer of makeup, but that it shouldn't be worn for more than 14 hours. Oliver calculated that he would be able to keep the mask off for the duration of Esther's dinner party. Just then, his assistant approached. "Sir, Miss Esther is here." Oliver wasn't ready for Esther to see his face just yet. He picked up the mask and was about to put it on again, but it was too late. She burst through the door and saw his uncovered face for the first time since the accident. He turned his head, and they locked eyes. She stared at his face, and he read a series of emotions in her eyes that went from shock to pity to sorrow. She had known that he had suffered horrific burns to his face, but being confronted with them was more shocking than she had imagined it would be. "Oh, Oliver, it's all my fault," she said, close to tears. "No, it has nothing to do with you. It was Mackenzie." Oliver's eyes grew dark. "I'll let her be for now, but once your engagement party's over, I'll claim the interest she owes me." "Okay." Esther nodded slowly and gazed into his eyes. "But you still have to be careful. After all, we still don't know where Gavin's hiding out, and the Sloane family only said that they wanted to disown him. They said nothing about getting justice for what he did to Xavier and me. And since he still hasn't shown up, he must be planning something." "Don't worry, I'll be careful." Oliver smiled as best he could with his scarred face. The following afternoon, the Sloane and Williams families hosted the banquet to mark the official engagement of Esther and Xavier. Nancy and Jonathan had arrived in Cuba the previous evening and had already given their gifts to the venue that morning. In the main hall, many people had begun to gather for the celebrations. Nancy noticed that most of the guests' attitudes toward Jonathan had changed. They treated him in a much more friendly manner. So they damn well should, she thought. After all, Esther and I have been close for years, and Jonathan and Xavier have been friends since childhood. There had always been animosity between Jonathan and the Williams family, but it had eased up a lot since the duel between Jonathan and Oliver at Arthur's funeral. The Davidsons and the Sloanes almost seemed to be getting along. There were plenty of smaller families in Cuba who tried their best to profit from the three big families. With the imminent marriage between the two of them, it looked like the power players of Cuba were about to be reshuffled, and the minor players saw their opportunity to curry favor with both Jonathan and Xavier. Even Nancy noticed that she had a lot more women around her than she ever had before, but she could see through their plastic attention, and it made her laugh inside. The same women had looked down on her in the past and had accused her of climbing the social ladder by using her good looks to hook in Jonathan. And when she had quietly become the leader of the U.S. gaming industry, it had only given her cynics even more ammunition. They had assumed that she had used her position as Jonathan's wife to achieve such success. It hadn't occurred to any of them that perhaps she was more than just a pretty face. Just as those thoughts were fleeting through Nancy's mind, someone approached her. "Oh, Maria, I love your dress. It's really beautiful. Am I right in thinking it's straight off the runway from Paris Fashion Week?" Nancy smiled indulgently, and several other young women were drawn into the conversation. "Oh my God, Maria! Is that a DMK bag? I swear I saw it on their official website just yesterday. There are only 4 of them in the entire world. What brand of skincare do you use? Your skin is so smooth, just like satin." Nancy listened to the fake comments from the women around her and wanted to smack them all. Instead, she smiled politely. "Actually, my husband bought these things for me," she lied. "So I honestly couldn't say who I'm wearing." It was like feeding a pack of starving dogs. No matter how sour the hearts of those jealous socialites really were, they wagged their tails and ate every morsel Nancy fed to them. "I'm so envious," one of them said. "Your husband must love you so much. You make such a wonderful couple." "You're such a beautiful person, Maria. I wish I was more like you." The false compliments continued until the MC announced that the engagement banquet had officially begun. Nancy breathed a sigh of relief and looked around for Jonathan. She saw that his conversation with the other family heads had finished, and she walked to his side and took his hand in hers. Just then, Xavier's grandfather, Carter, took his seat at the center of the table, and Oliver, in the absence of Esther's parents, sat beside him. That was the cue for everyone else to sit, so Nancy and Jonathan followed suit and found their seats. When everyone was seated, the MC made an announcement. "Welcome, everyone, to the official engagement party of Xavier and Esther." Everyone cheered and clapped for a full minute, and the MC had to tell them all to hush so he could talk about the happy couple's relationship. After he sung their praises for several minutes, he said, "Please put your hands together for the future Mr. and Mrs. Sloan." Again, the guests clapped and cheered as Esther and Xavier walked hand in hand along the red carpet toward the stage. Esther wore a long champagne-colored dress, and her hair was tied up loosely but elegantly. A pair of gold earrings dangled from her ears. Beside her, Xavier was looking smart in a black tuxedo. His cheeks had a healthy red glow, and he looked like a prince who had just stepped out of a fairy tale book. They made their way toward the stage, greeting their guests as they passed by them. Finally, they arrived at the stage and stood beside the MC. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC said, "please also welcome Carter Sloan to the stage." The guests applauded as Carter slowly made his way up to the stage. His elderly face, full of markings from a long and fulfilling life, appeared red, and his breathing was irregular. But he spoke succinctly and with an energy that belied his age. Next, it was Oliver's turn to speak. He began with some small talk about each of the 2 families, and then he turned and looked seriously at Xavier. "Take care of my sister," he said imploringly. "Love her like you love life itself." Xavier nodded. "I will, man. I truly will." Oliver returned to his seat. "It's now time for our couple to make their engagement official," the MC announced. But just as he spoke, a man rushed up to Oliver and whispered something in his ear. Everyone turned to look, and a murmur of curiosity rippled through the guests. "Sir, Miss Williams' family has been captured," the man whispered. "The kidnappers say that if the engagement party continues, they'll sabotage the wedding." He waited for Oliver's response, which was a long time coming. Esther and Xavier were still standing only a few feet away from Oliver, and they overheard the man's words. The color drained from Esther's face, and she surged toward the messenger. Xavier grabbed her arm and pulled her back. "Esther," he said helplessly. Oliver stood up and walked toward her. "Don't worry, Esther," he said quietly. "It's not your parents. It's some actors I hired that they took." Esther stared in stunned silence, not knowing who to believe. Oliver patted her on the shoulder. I'll fill you in with all the details later. For now, you only need to know that they're safe and well. Esther recalled her conversation with Oliver the previous day. She had speculated that Alexander and Gavin were probably planning something, but she hadn't imagined they would attempt to abduct her parents. Did Oliver know this was going to happen? She wondered, still staring at him in disbelief. He knew, and he took action to prevent it. Before she could think of anything else, she noticed that another messenger had approached Carter and was whispering into his ear. Sir, someone attempted to harm Xavier's parents. She heard the man say, but it seems their plan was foiled by Jonathan, and the kidnappers were all captured. Thank you, Carter said, and he waved the man away. The MC watched the situation unfold and wondered how he should proceed. He glanced over at Oliver and Carter and saw them both indicate to him that he should continue. He nodded discreetly. As I was saying, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the happy couple to make their engagement official. The guests' attention returned to the formal proceedings, and everyone soon forgot about the brief interlude. On the stage, Xavier took out a ring and placed it on Esther's finger. He fought back tears of emotion as it dawned on him that he was finally going to marry the woman he loved, and he was pledging his love and loyalty to her in front of dozens of witnesses. Esther gazed lovingly into his eyes as he slid the ring onto her finger. When it was done, she held her left hand up for everyone to see, and the guests cheered. Xavier had never felt so happy in his life, and it warmed Esther's heart to see such joy in her fiancé's face. From his seat at the main table, Oliver watched intently. The relief that the formalities were finally over was evident on his face, but he was happy that he had been able to give Esther the celebration that she deserved. From then on, he could turn his attention back to his own matters. He no longer had any reason to worry about Esther, and all his time would now be taken up with becoming the head of the family and all the considerations that came with the role. The MC announced that Esther and Xavier were officially engaged and were ready to become a married couple. And then it was time for the party to start. Xavier was in such a good mood that he drank 1 or 2 glasses of wine more than he should have. As a result, his flushed face was full of smiles. Esther wanted to be able to remember the day, so she limited her alcohol consumption to just a few glasses. Midway through the evening, Nancy and Jonathan went to chat with them both. They all raised their glasses and clinked them together. Xavier and Esther, congratulations on getting engaged, Nancy said with a squeal. Esther grinned, and she and Nancy clinked glasses again. Xavier laughed. I'll drink to that, he said, and took another swig of his wine. Take it easy there, Xavier, Nancy said with a smile. Esther looked at her fiancé and felt a surge of love ripple through her body. Then, she leaned in toward Nancy and said, Hey, I'm going to get married to your cousin. You'll have to call me Cuz from now on. They all laughed, and then Xavier dragged Esther onto the dance floor. 2 days after the party, Esther returned to New York with Nancy and Jonathan. Xavier remained in Cuba to attend to some family business. He would go back to New York in time for Latham's wedding, and he and Esther agreed that they would get married soon afterward. They decided they would keep their wedding small, with just a few of their nearest and dearest in attendance, so they were able to book a date at a small venue in only a few weeks' time. After Esther returned home, she devoted the next couple of days to planning her wedding day. But she also made sure that she and Xavier would have a special honeymoon. Xavier returned home 2 days after Esther, and the day after that, the two of them did an engagement shoot. Esther was excited and didn't want to have to wait for the photos, so she took a few selfies and sent them to Nancy. As she was sending the photos through, a message popped up on her phone from Oliver. Hey Esther, what are you up to? Xavier and I are doing an engagement shoot. Send me some pictures. Esther picked a few of the best photos and forwarded them to him. Oliver scrolled through the photos that Esther had sent to him, and he felt queasy. He remembered a time, many years ago, when he had passed by a wedding dress shop. He stopped and looked out the window and tried to imagine what Esther would look like in some of them. His feelings were confused, but he knew that she would be the most beautiful woman in the world on her wedding day. He wondered who the lucky man would be. He had an almost unhealthy possessive desire toward her, but when he was younger, he hadn't thought much of it. When she got her first boyfriend, she excitedly showed Oliver a photo of the boy. All he wanted to do was push the kid onto the ground and beat him up. He couldn't make sense of his emotions because, at that time, he still thought they were related by blood, and his unnatural feelings toward her frightened and confused him. As a way of protecting himself from his terrifying desire, he deliberately spent less and less time with her, and gradually, he became colder and colder toward her. When his father returned from the dead and explained the situation, Oliver finally understood his feelings and realized that they could be together. She had never been a blood relative after all. As he studied the images on his phone screen, his mouth formed a bitter smile. At last, he knew who Esther would be marrying, and it wasn't him. He sighed and saved the photo onto his phone. Then, he replied to her text. "They're beautiful." "They are, aren't they?" she wrote back. "There were some others, but I'm not going to bore you with them all. Maybe I'll show them to you when I see you next." "Okay." He waited for her to write another message, but there were no more. He took another look at the photos she had sent and imprinted them in his memory. He was lost in his thoughts when he heard a gentle knock on his door, and his assistant walked in. "Sir, here's the project information you wanted." Oliver thanked him and motioned for him to put the information on his desk. The assistant did as he asked and then turned to leave. "Stuart, wait," Oliver said, and the man stopped in his tracks. "Is there something else I can do for you?" Stuart asked. He was a middle-aged man with a lot of business experience, and Oliver found him to be highly efficient and trustworthy. "I need you to help me find out how to go about sourcing a surrogate mother," Oliver said. Stuart didn't bat an eyelid. With the professionalism he was renowned for, he simply asked, "Do you have any special requests?" "Yes. She must be between 21 and 24 years of age, and hold a degree in undergraduate or postgraduate studies. She has to be law-abiding and come from a decent but normal family." He paused as he thought, "As for appearance, I'd like her to be nice-looking, but intelligence is more important than looks. Find me a short list of 5. And Stuart, tell no one about this." "Of course. I'll get on it right away." Stuart left the office and closed the door behind him. Oliver leaned back in his chair and gazed through the floor-to-ceiling window at the scenery outside. His father and older brother were both dead, which meant he was the last living male in the family. He couldn't let them down by allowing the family to die out, so it was imperative that he should have an heir. He had achieved everything he had set out to achieve in his life so far, so it was time for him to think about creating the next generation of the Williams family. Once again, Stuart proved himself to be the competent assistant he was, and in just 2 days, he had collected information on 20 possible surrogacy candidates. He arranged the files of all the women on a large table in the conference room, and carefully eliminated them one by one until there were 5 remaining. All 5 women had excellent credentials and academic qualifications, and they all came from normal, low-profile families. Each one had a different purpose for having chosen to be a surrogate, but they had all signed up for the same underlying reason: to earn some money. Even though the 5 women were all highly educated, at the end of the day, it was difficult for them to secure well-paid jobs. Stuart studied the 5 remaining women and was drawn to one in particular. Her mother had suffered a workplace injury and was bedridden. Her father was a drinker and a gambler, and he had whittled away what little money the family had. The girl had been left to take care of her mother alone, With no income of her own, she had been desperate to find a way to earn some money. A friend had told her that a great deal of money could be made through surrogacy, and she had decided that was what she would do. The other 4 candidates had similar stories. Stewart checked through all the girls' information and confirmed that there were no obvious problems, so he sent their details through to Oliver. Oliver had just finished a transnational meeting and could feel a headache coming on. He rubbed his forehead and opened the files that Stewart had sent him. He studied each one in turn and learned as much as he could about the 5 women. Stewart had done exactly what he had asked of him. Each one of the women fitted his criteria perfectly. He looked through them all again and eliminated 3 of the candidates. The remaining 2 both seemed perfect. One had studied finance, while the other had studied software design. The word design made him think of Esther again, and he decided there and then that she would be the one. The woman's name was Zoe Chevis, and she was 23 years old. She had graduated from an Ivy League university in America with a full scholarship. But because her mother was bedridden, she had no choice but to return to Cuba to care for her mother as soon as her studies had ended. Oliver took a closer look at Zoe's photo. It had been taken without any makeup or filter, but the girl had a delicate and lovely face. He called Stewart into his office. "This is the one." "Okay," Stewart said, taking note of the woman Oliver had chosen. "How soon do you want the surrogacy to be arranged?" "I first want you to arrange for Zoe to get a physical examination done. If there are no problems, I'll take a trip to the hospital to do my part, and I'll let them complete the follow-up arrangements with her." "Sure, I'll organize everything right away." Stewart understood that Oliver didn't want to meet Zoe. He didn't want to have any sort of interaction with her. He just wanted her to carry and birth his child. 2 hours later, Stewart met Zoe and her agent at the hospital. It was a private hospital that the Williams family had used for generations. Zoe underwent a physical examination, and the results reflected the records of her family that Oliver had read in her file. She was a healthy young woman with no hereditary diseases. The doctor confirmed that everything was in order and plans were made to proceed with the surrogacy. Everything would be carried out medically, using IVF protocols. The next day, Oliver went to the hospital to provide his sperm sample, and at the same time, Zoe began her hormone treatment. A couple of weeks later, it was time to harvest Zoe's eggs. She returned once more to the hospital. The egg extraction process was relatively quick and painless. The doctor informed her that her eggs would be inseminated immediately, and a viable embryo would hopefully be implanted in her uterus soon afterward. Zoe took note of the instructions and left the hospital with mixed feelings. As she returned to her car, she received a notification on her phone that she had received a sum of money. The first payment of $15,000 had been deposited into her account. The surrogate agreement between Oliver and Zoe stipulated that Zoe would be responsible for carrying out the full term of her pregnancy and taking care of the child for the first 18 months, after which she would hand over full custody to Oliver. During her pregnancy, she would receive round-the-clock support, including cooked meals, grocery deliveries, no-expense doctor appointments, cleaning services, and whatever else she needed. In return, she had to agree to do everything in her power to keep herself healthy and happy. The contract also stated that the surrogacy would remain completely confidential and that she would never know the identity of the child's father. The financial transaction included surgery for Zoe's mother at a private hospital and a 2-year physiotherapy program to improve her mobility. All expenses would be paid for by Oliver. Finally, she would receive $1 million and the keys to a luxury apartment in Havana once the child turned 18 months old. Zoe thought it was a good deal. She would never have to worry about money again, and her mother would finally receive the treatment she needed. Though she realized the following 27 months would be difficult, she had signed the agreement without a moment's hesitation. Stewart had then taken her to a villa in a secluded neighborhood and introduced her to the staff there. They were polite and were aware of the situation. She later found out that they would also sign a confidentiality agreement and weren't allowed to reveal Oliver's identity. Once everything had been taken care of, Oliver went about his day-to-day business and soon forgot about the surrogate pregnancy. 2 days before his wedding, Latham was at the hospital visiting his father, whose condition had suddenly worsened despite the chemotherapy. He lay in his hospital bed, clinging to Latham's hand and choking back tears. "Son, I'm so pleased you're finally getting married. I hope this woman will make you happy. You deserve someone special after Olivia. I'm sorry. I hope you don't mind me mentioning her." Latham forced a smile. "It's okay, Dad. There's nothing we can do to change the past. Just rest and gather your strength. I'll be expecting you at my wedding." Mitchell tried to say something, but no words came out. Latham noticed he had trouble breathing, and he quickly ran out into the hallway, shouting for a doctor. An oncologist and 2 nurses came running into the room immediately and put Mitchell on oxygen. Latham then called his private doctor. Back at the company, Ian, the director of quality control, was desperately trying to get a hold of Latham. He had asked his assistant to call him several times already. "Did you succeed?" he asked his assistant anxiously. She shook her head. "The line is always busy. I can't get through." "Let me try." Ian grabbed the phone on his desk and quickly dialed Latham's number. "You're right. It's busy. Who the heck could he be talking to all this time?" "He's at the hospital. Maybe he doesn't want to be disturbed." Just then, Marius, the marketing director, came into his office. "It's no use. Philip and Doris Edwards are still threatening to sue us because of the faulty chips in our products." Ian groaned. "I don't understand how this could have happened. We've had the same chip supplier for years, and there's never been a problem. Didn't even occur to me to do a quality check." "Maybe you should meet with them and apologize on behalf of our company," the assistant suggested. "I already tried, since they seem to be reasonable people," Marius said. "I was hoping I could persuade them to let us find a solution, but they're furious and won't budge. Too bad Ashley's not here anymore. I'm afraid there's nothing we can do." "Wait a minute. Who's Ashley?" Ian asked. "Can she speak to them?" "Ashley Porter. She's the sister of Brock Porter, the head of Obsidian Industries. She used to work here, but she quit. Get her contact details and see if she's willing to speak to Philip and Doris. Latham will kill me if I don't sort out this mess. It was his biggest contract this year. Besides, he has enough on his plate right now with his upcoming wedding and his father's illness." "Okay," Marius said. "I'll see if HR has Ashley's contact details." He called her 10 minutes later. She had just returned to her desk after a brainstorming session with her team to come up with a promotional campaign for a new line of products on the Davis Group's e-commerce site. "Hello, this is Ashley Porter," she said as she answered the call. "Hi, this is Marius. Remember me? Your ex-boss?" "Of course. How can I help you?" "How have you been?" he asked, ignoring her question. "I've been doing okay, thanks. I'm really busy at the moment. Is there something I can help you with?" Marius laughed awkwardly. "As a matter of fact, there is. Do you remember Phyllis and Doris Edwards? We signed a deal with them earlier this year. They really liked you." "Yeah, I remember them." Marius cleared his throat. "You and Latham negotiated the contract. We just delivered the second batch of products to them. We're in a bit of a pickle." Ashley frowned. "What happened? Aren't they satisfied with the products?" "They were very happy with the first batch, but this second batch has faulty chips in it. Obviously, we had no idea. They discovered this and called us immediately. Our quality control team checked, and they're right. There's a problem with the chips." "I'm sorry to hear that," Ashley said. "Can't you contact the supplier?" "We did, and they promised to give us a refund and send us new ones so we can incorporate them into the products. The issue is the deadline. The contract we signed with Philip and Doris's company has specific delivery dates for the batches. And we won't get the chips on time. so they're threatening legal action due to the breach of contract. Ashley whistled. Wow, that's bad. I remember they told Latham and me that the delivery dates were non-negotiable. They have end customers whose orders have to be fulfilled, and they're facing stiff competition. Every missed deadline can lead to huge losses for the company. Who's going to compensate them? That's right, Marius said. At the moment, we're looking at a 3-day delay. I can understand why they're furious, but we just can't have a lawsuit on our hands. Apart from the legal expenses, it would look bad for the company. I get it, but what can I do? Ashley asked. Marius sighed. I know you left the company, and I hate to ask you this, but do you think you can talk the couple out of suing us? You were part of the project, and they really liked you. I don't see any other way out of this. She hesitated. Marius, I was just a marketing assistant in your department. What makes you think they'll listen to me? Besides, I don't even work for the company anymore, like you said. I think someone senior needs to deal with this matter. We've tried everything, Ashley. We sent both our lawyer and our quality control team over there. Nothing worked. They won't budge. You're our only hope. What about Latham? He's the head of the company. His father is in the hospital, dying, and his wedding is in 2 days. He's got enough to deal with, and we can't even reach him. I know you two have a special bond. He trusted you. The nerve of him, bringing up my relationship with Latham, Ashley thought. She resented having worked so hard at that company just so she could please him. In the end, Latham had used her and had tossed her away like she had meant nothing to him. Please, Ashley, Marius begged. Our company isn't as powerful as the Davis Group. If we have to go to court, it'll be the end. We don't have the financial resources and reputation to survive something like this. I blame our quality control department, but what's done is done. Ashley's heart sank. Though she hated Latham, she had enjoyed working with her colleagues in the marketing department. They had been welcoming and kind. And no one had shown the least bit of envy when she had been the one to help close the deal of the century with Philip and Doris Edwards. It occurred to her that she would hate to see the company go under. Okay, Marius, she finally said. I'm willing to give it a try. You're a star, Ashley. This is the best news I've had all day. I'll arrange for someone to pick you up at your office later today and bring you over here so I can brief you properly. Does that work? There's no need to pick me up. I have a car. I'm not making any promises, though. Don't worry. Just do your best. That's all we can ask. She pulled up in front of Latham's office building an hour later. Marius had already prepared all the information she needed and gave her a copy of the original agreement. He gave her a few pointers on what she could say to help change their clients' minds. Do you think I should go with you? He asked. Ashley shook her head. No, it's better if I speak to them on my own. No amount of people or documentation is going to help. I'll just have to use my persuasive skills and charm. That evening, Ashley parked her car in front of the Edwards villa and grabbed the wine and ingredients she had brought. There was no one home, however, so she waited patiently by their front door. It was already dark when their car pulled up in the driveway. Phyllis and Doris got out and were surprised to see her there. Ashley, how lovely to see you. What brings you here? Doris asked politely. Ashley smiled. Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Edwards. I was in the neighborhood to meet a friend, but she canceled on me at the last minute. I hope you don't mind. I decided to drop by. Is that so? I'm sorry you had to wait outside. We just left the office a while ago. Enough with the formalities, though. Please call us Philip and Doris. She hugged Ashley and ushered her inside. Philip nodded in greeting and followed them. What's in the bag? All the ingredients for peach cobbler. A friend of mine discovered the most amazing recipe in Santa Fe. Ashley explained. I was supposed to go over to my friend's house to bake tonight. Well then, you must make the cobbler here, Doris declared. Ashley nodded. I'd love to. I even bought fresh peaches at the market. I just need a baking pan and an oven. She followed Doris to the kitchen. "You can find everything you need here," Doris said. "Why don't I whip up some dinner while you bake? It'll give us a chance to catch up." Ashley nodded. She was nervous about baking since she had only made peach cobbler once at Hannah's old apartment. She knew she wasn't nearly as skilled as her friend, and she had only brought the ingredients as an excuse to stay as long as she could at Philip and Doris's house. "I guess I'm just going to have to make the best of it and pray it turns out well," she thought. She and Doris made small talk while they cooked and baked. Ashley was careful not to bring up the potential lawsuit until much later. She would wait until the couple had eaten and drunk. She prepared the dessert in the baking dish, put it in the oven, and helped Doris make dinner. 40 minutes later, the oven timer signaled that the peach cobbler was ready. "I think I'll leave it in a while longer," Ashley said. "The recipe calls for extra baking time. Some things are worth waiting for. Wouldn't you agree?" She looked at Doris meaningfully, hoping that she understood what she was getting at. But Doris just smiled. "You're the expert, dear. I'll leave it to you." Ashley decided to wait a while before dropping any more hints. They made small talk for another half hour before serving dinner. Philip seemed to be in a good mood and uncorked the wine she had brought. Ashley had always liked him. He was serious for the most part, but enjoyed good company. "I'm really glad to have you here," Doris said to Ashley. "Our daughter's all grown up and has moved away. She rarely visits." They had a lovely meal, and Ashley brought out the peach cobbler, which had turned out quite well. After they finished eating, she got to clear up the plates, but Doris put a hand on her arm. "Leave those, dear. Our housekeeper will clean up later." Philip sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Why don't we cut to the chase, Ashley? Tell us why you're really here." She turned red with embarrassment. "Okay, I won't continue the charade. I didn't happen to be in the neighborhood to meet a friend this evening. I came to see you." Doris nodded. "We gathered that. I just want you to know that our current spat with your old company doesn't change how we feel about you. We have many demanding end customers, and the products we received were faulty." Philip added, "Someone needs to be held accountable. We have an agreement." "I understand your predicament," Ashley reassured him. "It just happened at a very unfortunate time. Latham's father is ill, and he's getting married in a few days. He's been so preoccupied with personal matters lately. I'm sure this will never happen again." Doris sighed. "We like Latham, and I'm sorry to hear about his father. But we're his clients, and we're paying his company a great deal of money. We own a small business, you see, and we can't afford to go under because of this. Our losses affect all of our employees." Ashley felt bad for the couple and understood their frustration. She had learned about the principles of doing business from her father. She racked her brain, trying to think of something to say that could change their minds, but none of her excuses seemed convincing. Doris patted her shoulder. "Please understand that this potential lawsuit is not about Latham. It's about his company's breach of contract." Philip put his napkin down and poured himself another glass of wine. "It's hard to think about business when you have a crisis at home, but he really shouldn't have let his personal problems affect the company's operations. Besides, he has a quality control department. If they had just followed the strict protocol and checked the chips they had received from their supplier, none of this would have happened." Ashley's heart sank. "I realize that, but we're only talking about a 3-day delay for the new chips. Is there any way you can negotiate with your end customers? Maybe Latham can call the supplier and ask them to work overtime so they deliver the chips earlier." Philip shrugged. "You know how dynamic the market is. Things change every day. Even a half-day delay can lead to unrecoverable losses. I'm very sorry, but there's nothing you can do. We're going ahead with the lawsuit." Ashley sat back in her chair and sighed, wondering what her father would do in this situation. Would he be more ruthless, she thought? Am I supposed to just accept failure and leave? Her thoughts turned to Latham. She wondered whether he would still go ahead with the wedding, knowing that his company was going to be sued. She hated him and his irresponsible ways, but she decided everyone needed a chance at happiness. He had suffered enough with his wife's passing, and perhaps he genuinely loved the woman he was about to marry. A plan suddenly started to shape in her mind. She stood up and smiled at Doris and Philip. "Thank you for putting up with me. I really enjoyed dinner, and I'm sorry I came up with such a lame excuse to see you. I promise I'll do my best to settle this matter." They thanked her for coming, and as soon as she walked out of the door, she called Marius. "It didn't go well, but I think I have a plan. What's the shortest time the supplier can deliver the new chips?" 2.5 days. "Okay, thanks." She hung up and stood outside on the lawn for a few minutes, listening to the clap of thunder in the distance. Ashley felt a slight breeze just before the clouds broke. At first, there was only a scattered shower, but soon, she was standing in the middle of a heavy downpour. She looked up at the ominous sky and wondered whether she would get hit by lightning. She turned around and saw Philip and Doris watching her from their living room window. Maybe this is a sign, she thought. Even the heavens want me to settle things with a thumb once and for all. It was raining just like this when I delivered those documents to him. It was time to let bygones be bygones so they could both move on. She remembered how she had felt about him and all the effort she had made to please him. She hated to think that it was all for nothing. The only solution was to make one last-ditch effort to help him and his company. She walked to her car, letting the rain soak her clothes and hair. The street was empty and quiet. She glanced at the window of the house again, but Philip and Doris had gone. They liked Ashley almost as much as their own daughter, but business was business, and they firmly believed that personal relationships were an entirely separate matter. Doris went upstairs to put on her face mask and looked out her bedroom window. She was shocked to see that Ashley was still standing outside in the rain. She ran downstairs. "Philip, she's still out there and it's pouring down. Do you think something's wrong?" Her husband sighed, removed his reading glasses, and got up from the couch. He pulled back the curtain and peered out of the window. Ashley was soaked to the skin. Her clothes were stuck to her, and her hair was dripping wet. "What is she doing just standing there?" Doris asked. "It's raining cats and dogs. Why doesn't she get into her car?" "She'll eventually go. I don't think she's having car trouble. Otherwise, she would have come to us for help. It's okay, sweetie. Go upstairs and change into something comfortable. Let's see what's on TV." Doris nodded and kissed her husband. She willed herself to forget about Ashley. Now that she was getting older, she couldn't help feeling sentimental sometimes. Their daughter only came to visit once a year, and she missed being a mother to someone. She put on her nightgown and joined her husband in the living room. They snuggled up on the couch and watched a documentary. It was almost 11 o'clock by the time it finished. Philip yawned. "I think it's time for bed." They turned the television off and went upstairs. Doris applied skin cream on her face while her husband put his pajamas on. They then climbed into bed and switched off their bedside lamps. Doris turned toward the window. "Do you think she's gone?" "Of course. She can't stand outside in the rain forever." They heard the clap of thunder, followed by the sounds of large raindrops pounding the windowsill. Ashley was still standing outside. She hadn't budged for over 2 hours. Her shoes and socks were completely soaked, and she noticed that she was standing in a mud puddle. She couldn't see anything past her car due to the poor visibility. She looked up at the street lamp and watched the lightning in the sky to pass the time and forget about how cold she was. The Edwards villa was completely dark now, so she assumed they had gone to sleep. She checked her watch and saw it was past midnight. The Thom's wedding is tomorrow, she thought. I wonder if Doris and Philip are going to change their minds by then. She decided to remain outside their house no matter what. The only thing she could do was give it her best shot. The rain was as relentless and determined as she was. She hugged herself to try to keep warm. A few cars passed by, but she was invisible in the dark. Doris and Philip didn't sleep well that night and woke up well past their usual hour in the morning. Doris stared at the digital clock on her nightstand and couldn't believe it was already 7 o'clock. She glanced at her husband, who was still sound asleep. She got out of bed, washed her face, and put on a jumpsuit. She then pulled the curtains open to look out the window. It was still raining, and Ashley was standing in the same spot as the previous night. Doris gasped, thinking, "What is wrong with that girl? Did she spend the entire night in front of our house?" Though she couldn't see Ashley very well, she was convinced she looked much paler. Her eyes were closed, and her body was swaying as if she was about to fall over. Doris sighed and went downstairs to have breakfast. The housekeeper was waiting for her in the dining room with a cup of coffee and some toast. "Ma'am, the young woman who was here has been standing outside on the street since last night." Doris waved her hand to dismiss the topic. "Don't worry about it. She's up to something." She skimmed the morning newspaper as she sipped her coffee, but found it difficult to focus. Her husband came down a few minutes later, and they sat in awkward silence for a while. "I wonder if there was flooding," Philip finally said. "I hope there won't be a traffic jam on the way to work. I need to sign that contract." "According to the news, a lot of areas in and around the city have been flooded. Maybe the rain will stop later. Should we just postpone our morning meetings?" They avoided talking about Ashley for as long as they could, but when they got up from the breakfast table, they glanced out the window at the same time. Ashley was still there, wiping the rain from her face. She felt weak and dizzy and leaned against her car for support. She was tempted to get into her car to rest, but she knew she would end up driving away if she did that. Philip and Doris waited for the rain to stop. They had lunch at noon and ate the rest of the peach cobbler that Ashley had made the night before. It was still raining in the afternoon, so they decided to stay at home and postpone their meetings to the following day. Ashley was still standing outside their villa. She hadn't eaten anything since dinner the previous day, and her stomach was growling. She had no idea how she would survive for another 2 days. She checked her watch. It was already 6 o'clock in the evening. Bethel must be making last-minute preparations for his wedding, she thought. He'll look so good in a suit. She pictured him at the altar, smiling as his bride walked down the aisle. The wedding ceremony would take place at 10 the following morning, which was only 16 hours away. She was determined to see her plan through and then forget about him. She hoped they would never cross paths again. She was weak from standing outside for so long. Night fell, and she noticed that she had lost all feelings in her arms and legs. The soft patter of rain filled the night air. She could see fireflies around her and blinked, thinking it was just her imagination. She closed her eyes and dropped to the ground. Philip was watching TV with Doris. Though he didn't normally talk during the film, he was unusually chatty that evening. They went to bed at 10 o'clock. Doris couldn't sleep and quietly got out of bed an hour later, careful not to wake her husband. But Philip was wide awake and turned on his bedside lamp when he heard her move. They looked at one another, sighed, and went to the window. They looked toward the spot where Ashley had been standing, but she wasn't there anymore. "Do you think she finally left?" Doris asked with a hint of disappointment in her voice. She stared out the window again and gasped when she noticed Ashley's limp body lying in a puddle of water next to her car. "Philip, look! She passed out." Her husband was horrified. "Quick, call 911 while I bring her inside. What on earth was she thinking? Standing outside in the rain for over a day?" Doris had already put on her robe and was rushing downstairs. Philip shook his head, remembering all the crazy things he and his wife had done over the years for the sake of their company. When Ashley opened her eyes, she was lying on the couch inside Philip and Doris's villa. Doris had changed her clothing and had wrapped her in a warm blanket. Ashley's face was pale, and she could barely move. She stared up at Doris with a dazed look in her eyes. "That was a very stupid thing to do," Doris murmured. "You could have gotten hypothermia. Here, I brought you some hot tea." "Doris, I'm so sorry," Ashley faltered in a hoarse voice. Doris handed her the cup of tea. "There now. Don't talk. Just drink this. You'll feel better." Ashley sipped the tea gratefully and looked out the window. It was dark outside. "I'm sorry for making you get up in the middle of the night." "You didn't make us do anything. We were already up and saw you lying there in front of your car." She sat down on the couch next to Ashley. "You must really like Latham to go through all this trouble for him. Am I right?" Ashley turned red with embarrassment. Doris sighed. "I know what it's like to be foolish and in love." Ashley was hopeful when she saw the look in her eyes. "Does this mean you're willing to drop the lawsuit?" Philip came in just then. "This damn rain won't let up. The entire city is flooded. I don't think we'll be going to the office in the morning, Doris." "Dear, can we use the weather as an excuse to explain the delay of our products? That'll give Latham's supplier enough time to deliver the new chips. What do you think? Will our customers buy it?" Her husband shrugged. "I don't see why not. Let's hope our competitors don't take advantage of the situation." Ashley burst into tears of joy. "Thank you so much. I really appreciate this." "The ambulance is on its way over," Philip told her. "Call them and tell them I'm fine. I just need some food and a hot bath." "Too late. They just arrived." They heard the sirens blaring as the ambulance pulled up in the driveway. Philip opened the front door and 2 paramedics came rushing in. Ashley tried to stand up, but fell back onto the couch. The paramedics examined her and concluded that she had a slight fever, but didn't need emergency care. They prescribed some medication and promptly left. Later, Ashley took a bath and put on the clothes Doris gave her. She felt much better and went out to the kitchen to have something to eat. It was already light outside, and she remembered that Latham was getting married that day. She was sad, but was determined to get the couple to agree not to sue his company. She left them that morning with a signed piece of paper saying that they had dropped the lawsuit. She was still weak, so they put her in a cab, and she went straight to Latham's office. It was early. She found only a few employees there, including Marius. She handed in the document, stating that Philip and Doris's company would not pursue legal action. Marius almost cried when he read it. "How can we thank you, Ashley? I have no idea how you pulled it off, but you're a genius." He told her that he had managed to reach Latham the previous day, but he had been at the hospital and had instructed him to handle the matter without him. "He was in such a rush to get off the phone that I didn't have time to tell him you'd gone to see Doris and Philip. Wait till he hears about this." After Ashley left, Marius called Latham, who had just arrived at the hotel for the wedding ceremony. "Marius, I can't talk right now. My father's about to arrive, and I need to get ready for the ceremony. Can it wait?" "Glad to hear your dad's feeling better, and sorry to bother you, but you'll never believe what just happened. Philip and Doris Edwards agreed to not go ahead with the lawsuit. Ashley convinced them to drop it just when we had given up all hope." Latham was so shocked that he almost dropped his cell phone. He loosened his tie and sat down on a chair. "Are you talking about Ashley Porter? How did she get involved in this mess?" "I contacted her the day before yesterday," Marius replied. "Ian and I had no idea how to solve the matter, and you were unavailable, so she agreed to help. I briefed her, and she went over to Doris and Phillips's house in person. She pulled it off, Latham. I have a signed document saying they won't sue us." "What did she do to convince them?" "I don't know. I tried calling last night, but she didn't pick up, so I thought perhaps she had given up. But she just showed up a few minutes ago and gave me the signed paper. She left in a hurry, so I didn't get a chance to ask her what she did to convince them." Latham was speechless. "Ashley's an absolute star," Marius continued. "She's smart, trustworthy, and reliable. She did what none of us could. I just wish I knew how she managed to persuade the couple." Just then, Samantha burst into his hotel room in her wedding dress. "I have an emergency. I can't zip up my dress. Can you help? Marius overheard. Listen, boss, we can continue the conversation later. I know it's your wedding day. Best of luck, and we'll talk soon. Latham hung up, but could barely focus on Samantha. He was still thinking about what Marius had said. Latham, are you listening to me? Samantha asked impatiently. What is it? Can you take a look at the zipper? Is it stuck? She turned around and pointed. Latham sighed and stood up. I'll fix it. He stared at her back and suddenly wished the ground would swallow him up. Luckily, she didn't see the bitter expression on his face. She had done everything in her power to make him fall in love with her during the past several weeks, but he remained cold and aloof. He refused to touch her, and their only physical contact had been walking arm in arm down the street. Even then, she had been the one to initiate it. She had tried to kiss him one evening when he had come home from work, but he had turned away. Whenever they went out, he made sure to put his hands in his pockets so she couldn't hold his hand. He tried his best to ignore her on weekends and came home late on weekdays, knowing she would be asleep. He made it a point to get up early in the mornings and leave for work before she got up. The previous night, she had gotten up and made a noise in the kitchen to lure him out of bed and into her room. He had woken up and had asked her if everything was okay, but had returned to his bedroom after. She knew that he felt forced into getting married because of her pregnancy. It doesn't matter, she thought. He's going to become my husband soon, and he'll grow to love me. She was looking forward to the ceremony and the reception afterward. Once they were married, there would be no way out for him. Latham fixed the zipper on her dress. She turned around and smiled. Thanks, honey. What a relief. She reached out to hug him, but he pulled away. Please excuse me. I need to make a call. He left her standing there and called Ashley. Hello? He heard her saying in a tired voice. Hi, it's me, Latham. Marius told me what happened. He said you went to see Doris and Philip and resolved everything? Yes, everything has been settled. They're very reasonable people, and they like me. That's it? They agreed not to sue just like that? You didn't promise them anything in return, did you? She was annoyed by his accusing tone. What could I promise them? Do you think I suggested a threesome or something? Or maybe offered something on behalf of the company I no longer work for? Come on, don't be silly. She could feel her old resentment toward him building up inside. Latham, I need to go now. I wish you all the happiness in the world. I'm sorry I won't be at your wedding, but I've had a rough few days. She hung up and stared out the cab window. She was slightly feverish, but her thoughts were clear. She looked at her watch. It was 9:30. He's going to get married in a half hour, and soon all of this will be over, she thought. She wiped away her tears and glanced out of the window again. The cab had just stopped at a red light, and there was a bridal shop at the corner. She stared with horror at the beautiful, elegant wedding dresses on display and burst into tears. Why is fate punishing me like this? She wondered. The cab driver turned around. Are you okay, miss? She waved her hand dismissively and fell silent. Back at the hotel, Latham called Ian and debriefed him on his conversation with Marius. They agreed on the next steps, and he put his phone away. Jonathan and Nancy had just arrived, followed by Latham's father and a handful of relatives. The banquet hall was exceptionally lively, and everyone was in high spirits. Latham felt like an outcast at his own wedding. I need to pull myself together, he thought. The ceremony's about to begin. He looked around and found a secluded corner. He took several deep breaths and willed himself to be more cheerful. Just then, he heard a female voice nearby, whispering to someone on the phone. Why do you keep calling me? He tiptoed closer and saw it was Samantha. She sounded annoyed. Didn't I already give you some money? He heard her say. I can't talk now. I'm about to get married. There was silence for a minute, followed by, Don't you dare. I'll kill you if you come here and cause trouble. The thom was puzzled and wondered who she was talking to. I know it's your child, Samantha continued. I'm just trying to make sure they grow up in a decent home. What am I supposed to do with a poor schmuck like you? She was silent for a few moments and then turned red with rage. 5 million? No, have that kind of money. He hasn't given me any yet. Just be patient and stop blackmailing me. You'll get your share in due time. I'm working on it. The thom couldn't believe his ears. The heated conversation continued, and Samantha finally promised to give the man an advance. She told him to meet her at their usual place after her doctor's appointment the following day. Samantha hung up the phone and scowled. I thought they said they'd kill him. Why isn't he dead yet? I'll have to do it myself. Irritated, she smoothed her wedding dress, took out her phone, and turned on the camera to use it as a mirror. After fixing a few loose strands of hair, she stepped out of the corner where she had been hiding. She stopped dead in her tracks as she emerged, shocked to find the thom standing in front of her. Her eyes met his cold gaze, and she gasped. Forcing a smile, she greeted him politely. Hello, Latham. What are you doing here? She wondered how much of the conversation he had overheard. He looked at her with indifference. He hadn't paid her much attention since she had moved in with him, and his hard stare unsettled her. She felt goosebumps tingle on her skin. She looked at him coyly. Why are you looking at me like that? Is it my makeup? He didn't respond. The atmosphere in the room was tense and strained. Beads of sweat rolled down Samantha's back. She approached him and asked, Are you okay? Do you feel unwell? Suddenly, he grabbed her arm, pushed her into another room, and closed the door. He pressed her against the wall. Trying to sound innocent, she spoke in a soft voice. What are you doing? You're scaring me. He looked at her pregnant belly with disgust. His expression was all she needed to confirm that he knew about everything. Samantha stepped forward and lashed out at him with her long fingernails. Although she seemed small and delicate, her aggressive attack surprised him, and she exuded an intense, murderous intent. He turned his body away from her, and her nails brushed past his neck. He dodged her, but she left deep scratches on his skin. Latham wasn't like Jonathan, who had grown up with dangerous situations around every corner. Jonathan knew how to fight, but Latham's childhood had been less exciting and peaceful. Although he was fit and agile, he hadn't expected to need to defend himself against a wildly attacking woman. The scratches began to bleed. Samantha narrowed her eyes as she lunged at him again. She only had one thing on her mind. She wanted to kill him. Suddenly, the door slammed open, and a figure swept into the room. It was Jonathan. Samantha cried out as he knocked her over. She tried to attack him, but he blocked her flailing arms and kicking legs. He grabbed her by the wrist and twisted her arms behind her back. She tried to struggle free, but stopped when she felt the sharp edge of a blade against her neck. Xavier rushed into the room, followed by the hotel's security guards. Nancy arrived moments later with her bodyguards. Jonathan handed Samantha over to one of the guards. Take her away. Don't kill her. I want to ask her a few questions first. The bodyguard bound her hands with cable ties before marching her out of the room. Jonathan wiped his hands clean with a disgusted expression. Nancy saw Latham's blood-stained shirt. You're injured. She turned to the hotel security guard. Call the hotel doctor. Hurry. Latham shook his head. No, I don't need a doctor. I'm fine. Jonathan can help clean up here. I have an important matter to take care of. When he had overheard Samantha's call, he immediately knew he had been set up. The woman that night at the hotel hadn't been her. It had been someone else, and he knew who it was. His heart began to pound in his chest, and he wondered who had set him up with Samantha. They must have planned everything in advance. Whoever it was also had to have known about Olivia and that she and Samantha both had a mole close to one of their eyes. Latham called the hotel in Miami and soon discovered that Samantha had been working there for several months. She was hard-working, but came from a poor family and worked long hours to support them. He spoke to the other hotel staff and found out that Ashley had gone up to his room with him. She hadn't stayed for very long before going back to her room. There was also another rumor circulating the hotel that Latham had taken another woman into his room and she had stayed there the whole night. He desperately needed to know if it really was Ashley who had gone to his room with him. And if it had been her, he wanted to know why she had left. He wasn't sure what had really happened that night. Latham left the hotel without changing out his blood-stained shirt. He still had a boutonniere pinned to his jacket. The scratches on his face had started to swell, and he looked like a madman as he hailed a taxi. When he got into the taxi, he dialed Ashley's number, but her phone had been turned off. He shook his head and gave the driver her address before picking up his phone again. This time, he called Mr. Edwards. Philip answered almost immediately. "Congratulations on your wedding." Latham didn't have time for pleasantries. "I have to ask you something. What did Ashley say to you? Why did you withdraw your complaint?" Philip sighed, and his cheerful tone became serious. "You owe that lovely young lady an apology. She has done you a huge favor. Doris and I had decided never to do business with you again, but she convinced us otherwise." Latham began to tremble. "How? What did she do?" Philip spoke slowly. 2 days ago, Ashley came to our house. She made us a peach cobbler and asked us to change our minds about suing your company. We refused and told her not to force the issue. She didn't insist any further and left." He paused briefly before continuing. "But she never actually left. Instead, she stood motionless in the pouring rain in our front garden." The story made Latham feel dizzy, and his body swayed. 2 days ago, his father had been taken to the hospital for an emergency operation. While Latham had anxiously waited outside in the hallway, he had watched the clouds burst and stared at the rain as it pelted to the ground. It had been raining ever since. Philip continued. "She stayed outside for 2 days. We noticed late last night that she had fainted on the lawn." He sighed. "We didn't want to agree, but she told us about your dad's health and your upcoming wedding. We decided to take the risk, and we withdrew the complaint. It wasn't just for her. She made us realize it would benefit us in the long run." Latham felt his throat tighten up, and he struggled to respond. It suddenly made sense why Ashley sounded hoarse and weak when he had spoken to her that morning. It was because she had stayed out in the rain for the sake of him and his company. He couldn't understand why she had done that for him. He remembered how she had run through a storm to deliver the bidding documents to him. She had been soaked to the bone, and her beautiful outfit had been covered in mud. She had even been accosted by thugs that day. He shuddered to think of what would have happened to her if Jonathan hadn't happened to pass by and save her. That was when he knew he had started to fall in love with her. And now, despite everything that had happened between them, she had stood again in the rain for him. All she had done to make the Edwards change their mind was to be likable and find a way to relate to them. As he thought about her, he noticed that the rain had stopped and the sun was shining through the clouds. Latham felt his world collapse around him. He became angry at himself for what he had done to her. Philip continued to talk. "You're a married man now. It would be best if you didn't lead her along anymore. If you don't love her, let her go. One must sometimes be cruel to be kind." Latham cleared his throat. "I didn't get married today. I want to marry Ashley. She's the one for me." Mr. Edwards sighed. "As you wish," he said before hanging up. The taxi pulled up to Ashley's house. Latham didn't notice another car pass by as he looked in his wallet for cash to pay the driver. Ashley had been in the passing car, and the fleeting moment was the closest they had been in a long time. He got out of the taxi and walked up to her front door. He rang the doorbell and waited. There was no response, so he rang the bell again. He called her name, but there was still no response. The scratches on his neck hurt, but the pain was nothing compared to his intense heartache. He slumped down on Ashley's front porch and thought about that fateful night. His memory of what had happened was blurred, but he remembered the soft feel of her silky smooth skin and how their bodies had intertwined. He immersed himself in the memory, and it felt familiar and reassuring. He had never felt that way around Samantha. When he awoke the next day, he had been very confused to find Samantha in bed with him, not Ashley. He hadn't realized that he had been drugged and deceived. He thought back to the day when he had seen her at the hospital, and she accused him of being an irresponsible scumbag. At that time, he had thought she was angry at him for having made her fall in love with him, while he had become engaged to someone else. But he didn't realize she had been referring to that night. And the day after the night they had spent together, she had remained too proud to ask him for an explanation. He remembered after she had scolded him at the hospital. Even in her fury, she still admitted she had fallen in love with him. She said she had followed him and Samantha to the hospital, but it didn't make sense now that he thought about it carefully. She had never been to his apartment, and he realized she couldn't possibly have followed them. Her face had been pale, and the clothing she had been wearing was cheap and ill-fitting, like the clothing for sale at the small store inside the hospital. Latham sat quietly as he remembered the details of those few days. When he had called to ask why she hadn't been at work, she had told him she was down with the flu. When she had met him at the outpatient waiting area, she had been weak, but it didn't seem as if she had been ill. He took a deep breath as a realization slowly crossed his mind. It occurred to him that she had already been in the hospital when she had seen him with Samantha. She could have been lying to hide the different illness. His back stiffened when he realized she might have been at the hospital for an abortion. His hair began to stand on end as his body started to tremble. He grabbed his phone and called his secretary. Find out if Ashley registered at the hospital last month for treatment. It was on the 25th. He leaned against the wall and sighed. At the wedding venue, Jonathan politely confronted the shocked members of Latham's family. Luckily, only a few people had been invited to the wedding, so only a handful of people from Latham's family and some childhood friends were there. As for Samantha's family, Jonathan had discovered that the old couple introduced as her parents had been hired actors. Latham's family didn't know what had happened and wondered why Latham hadn't yet arrived to explain. All Jonathan had said was that they had discovered a discrepancy with the bride's true identity, and Latham had called the wedding off. His family had been furious. Weak with worry, his mother, Jessica, didn't know what she should say to her husband. Suddenly, she heard a voice behind her. "I've just heard that the wedding has been canceled. Did something happen?" Latham's mother felt her heart sink. "Mitchell, what are you doing here? I told you to wait in the living room and rest." Mitchell waved his hand dismissively. "No one would have told me if I hadn't come." He glanced over the beautifully decorated reception hall, and his shoulders dropped. He started to sway as if he were about to faint, but his caregiver quickly caught him and led him to a chair. He shook his head. "Where's Latham? What's wrong with his bride? I thought I'd finally get to meet my grandson soon." He became more agitated as he spoke, and then, without warning, he collapsed. Jessica cried out, and Jonathan quickly called for an ambulance. Amid the chaos, Xavier phoned Latham. "You have to come back right now. Hurry, your father has collapsed. They're about to take him to the hospital." Latham felt his heart sink as he gripped his phone. "I'll be right there." He stood up and looked at Ashley's front door one last time before he called for his driver to pick him up. Matthew sipped his coffee when Walter entered the room. He cleared some plates on the table before turning to Matthew. "Sir, I've got some news concerning the matter you've asked me to investigate. I found out why Jonathan participated in the auction a while ago." He waited until Matthew gestured for him to continue. "Jonathan has a younger sister. Her name is Ashley Porter. Her brother, Brock Porter, is the heir to Obsidian Industries. She and Jonathan have the same mother but different fathers." Matthew raised his eyebrows. He immediately knew who Walter was talking about. He recalled seeing Ashley standing beside Nancy and supporting the Davis group in the media briefing. He turned to Walter and said softly, "Okay, you know what to do." Walter nodded. "Yes, sir. I'll arrange it straight away." After he left, Matthew took another sip of his coffee. He slowly put the cup down and gazed over the luscious gardens. "I hope Jonathan doesn't blame me." If he didn't do something about Alexander and his brothers, he couldn't guarantee that there would be someone to take over the reins for him. Jonathan was optimistic that he could handle everything, but Matthew knew that there were some things he had to deal with personally first. Matthew had first thought of using Nancy, but the young woman kept surprising him, and she was curious to see what she would do next. Therefore, he delayed his plans for a while. But the confirmation of Ashley's identity had changed everything. Latham hurried to the hospital. When he finally arrived, he found his mother and Jonathan waiting outside the intensive care unit. His mother's face was gray with worry. She gave him a tight hug. "Hello, Mom. How's he doing? What did the doctor say?" Jessica looked at him with teary eyes and sighed. "He's still the same. They've stabilized him." She placed his hands in hers. "My son, please tell me what's going on. I heard that there's a problem with Samantha." Latham looked at the floor. "Yeah, she lied to me. I learned about it this morning, so I canceled the wedding." "I'm sorry to hear that. And the child?" Latham shook his head. "It's not mine." Although Jessica was relieved, she felt sorry for Samantha. She was glad the girl hadn't tarnished their family, but also wondered how she would manage being a single mother. She was happy that Latham had found out in time and that he hadn't been tricked into raising someone else's child. It would have been too late if he had signed a marriage certificate. She sighed again and wondered what she would say to everyone she had bragged to when she had heard she would become a grandmother. A doctor approached the family waiting in the hallway and told them that Mitchell's condition had improved, but that he wanted to keep him in the hospital overnight for observation. They were free to go home and rest and could return the next day. Jonathan turned to Xavier. "Don't you and Esther have some wedding stuff of your own to take care of this afternoon? Why don't you go ahead? I'll tell Latham what we found out about Samantha once I have all the details." Xavier hesitated momentarily, but also anxious to formalize his marriage to Esther. "Thanks. Give me a call if there's anything else." Nancy gave Esther a big hug. "I'm so excited. My best friend is getting married soon." Esther smiled happily. At first, she had been nervous about getting married, but after Latham's wedding fiasco, she felt more confident. She almost felt as if she could burst into tears with excitement. "Thank you, my friend. You're going to make me cry." Nancy laughed. "It's just a piece of paper. Besides, you guys already do things that only a husband and wife should do, so you're practically married." Esther blushed a deep shade of red. "Nancy, I didn't expect you to be so explicit. Has your husband taken away your moral integrity?" Nancy grinned and retreated into Jonathan's arms. "Esther says you've destroyed my good morals." Jonathan looked at his wife's small frame and held her tightly. "Of course I have. I've done it many times." He lowered his head and whispered to Nancy, "And I enjoyed it every time." Nancy blushed, and she burrowed her red face against his chest. Esther looked at how happy Nancy and Jonathan seemed to be, and then glanced at Xavier. He seemed oblivious to the interaction that had just happened. She clenched her teeth greeted everyone, and walked off without waiting for him. Xavier quickly nodded at everyone and rushed after her. He caught up with her at the elevator and took her hand. She pulled her hand loose from his grip. Surprised, he looked at her and realized she seemed angry with him. He didn't know what he had done to upset her. She and Nancy had been talking and laughing just a few moments ago. He wondered whether she was nervous about marrying him. Esther stewed over Xavier's apparent lack of affection. She had thought he had finally understood what she wanted, yet it seemed to have become unimportant since he had proposed. She suddenly felt worried that their future wouldn't be as rosy as she had once imagined it to be. Her thoughts began to race. She was scared that he would put less effort into their relationship once they were married. She also worried about what it would be like once they had a child. They had planned to go out for lunch before their appointment at the marriage license office downtown. As they left the hospital, she turned to him and said, "I don't want to go downtown anymore." Xavier stared at Esther in disbelief. "What on earth are you talking about?" Esther glared at him and scowled. "I don't want to sign the marriage certificate today." Her anger toward Xavier had turned into anger for herself, and she felt irritated. She had been happy and excited to marry him. He shook his head. "Why? I don't understand. Did I do something to make you mad?" "No." He shrugged. "We've been looking forward to today for so long." He didn't know how to deal with her sudden change of heart. She turned away from him and rubbed her temples. "I don't want to talk right now." He touched her shoulder but didn't know what to say. It worried him that she didn't want to talk to him. It wasn't good for couples to hold back their feelings from one another. His heart beat faster, and he put her hands in his. He clasped it tightly and didn't let go. They drove straight back to his apartment instead of going to the restaurant. Esther didn't speak, and Xavier wondered why she had suddenly become so upset with him. She had seemed perfectly happy at the hospital when Jonathan had said they could leave. She had also seemed fine when Nancy had told her how excited she was for them. He wondered if it was because he had agreed to go before Jonathan had explained everything about Samantha. He thought that maybe that had made Esther view him as disloyal, which had put her off. Xavier mulled over the many possible reasons why she had suddenly gotten cold feet. They arrived at his apartment and rode the elevator to his floor in stony silence. He was generally unaffectionate, and many people perceived him as cold and indifferent. However, in the elevator, Esther realized that a wide rift had formed between them. Initially, she had been slightly annoyed, but she suddenly felt furious at him. She didn't know where the anger was coming from and thought it could have to do with her hormones. The more she thought about it, coupled with Xavier's icy silence, the more frustrated she felt. She had been expecting something like this to happen. She had finally found her one true love, but he didn't know how to love and cherish her. He hadn't even protested when she had told him she didn't want to go to the marriage license office anymore. The elevator stopped at Xavier's floor, and Esther tugged her hand free as they walked toward his apartment. Stunned, he watched her spin around and walk back into the elevator. He tried to catch up with her, but the doors closed before he reached her, and the elevator descended. He quickly pressed the button to call up the other elevator and waited impatiently for it to arrive. By the time Xavier reached the ground floor, Esther had already left the building. It was a hot summer's day, and the heat simmering off the sidewalk made her even angrier. She was still wearing the pretty dress and heels she had put on for Latham's wedding as she briskly walked away from Xavier's building. Her heels kept getting stuck in the grooves on the sidewalk, and she silently cursed and vowed to move out of his apartment as soon as possible. She fumed and began to mutter angrily when she heard the sound of someone running behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Xavier ran in front of her and blocked her way, forcing her to stop. "Esther, please. Whatever I did, I'm sorry." She tried to get past him when one of her heels got stuck in a crack in the sidewalk again. She wobbled for a second before losing her balance. Xavier caught her as she fell over. Thinking she had hurt her ankle, he quickly bent down to take a look. only to realize that her heel had become stuck. He gently removed her foot from her shoe and swooped her up in his arms. He spun around and carried her back to his apartment building. Esther looked over his shoulder. "You left my shoe behind." But Xavier continued to walk without turning around. "I'll buy you a new pair, seeing you like them that much." Esther gasped. He did care for her after all. He had run after her and had tried to help her when he had thought she had been hurt. She realized he had a sincere heart, and her anger disappeared. But she wasn't ready to let him know that just yet. She wanted him to prove himself and his desire to marry her. She had no idea that he was happy she had lost a shoe. To him, that meant she couldn't run away anymore. He carried her back to his apartment without any more worry. He still held on to her while they were in the elevator, and only set her down after he had opened his apartment door and put her on the couch. He then took the other shoe off her foot and handed her a pair of slippers. He walked to the window and tossed her shoe into the street below. Esther had to hold back her laughter and pretended to be serious. "You just littered." Xavier was stunned. After everything that had just happened, she felt it necessary to scold him for littering. But the local community had recently promoted an initiative to keep their neighborhood streets clean, and he didn't want to cause trouble for himself. "Stay here. I'll go downstairs and find the shoe to throw into a trash can. When I get back, we can talk about why you're so angry." She watched him with astonishment as he slipped on a pair of trainers, took the key, and left. She suddenly burst out laughing. Tears streamed down her face as her body heaved with laughter. She had to tell Nancy about it. Esther took her phone out of her purse and sent Nancy a voice note. She laughed as she described the scene between her and Xavier. "It was so funny. He took my shoe off and tossed it out the window without saying a word. I was completely shocked." Nancy replied with a text message. "That's hysterical. You better hurry up and get your marriage certificate signed. He's a good man. Don't let him slip away." Esther smiled happily. Nancy was right. She wouldn't find another man like Xavier. She thought about him with her shoe and burst out laughing again. Tears rolled down her face. She had calmed down when Xavier returned, but her face was still damp. He quickly sat beside her and put his arms around her shoulders. "Don't you want to get married anymore? Or are you perhaps a little nervous? It's just a piece of paper. I promise that nothing will change." While he had gone out to throw her shoe away, he had quickly gone online to read about pre-wedding jitters. The article perfectly described Esther's recent behavior, and it was evident that she was afraid their relationship would change after marriage. That's why many couples never married. He turned to her and looked serious. "Have I not given you enough sense of security?" Esther shook her head, and the lightness she had felt from laughing dissipated. Xavier seemed nervous and careful. It was evident that he truly loved her, which was why he worried about losing her. She thought about Nancy and Jonathan's marriage. Jonathan seemed to be in tune with Nancy's emotions. She realized that every marriage was different, and Xavier showed his love differently from how Jonathan showed his to Nancy. She no longer wanted to coax him into stating his undying love for her. She wrapped her arms around his neck. Their eyes locked, and she sighed. "I'm not anxious about marrying you. You're everything I've ever wanted in a man." Xavier frowned, puzzled. "I don't understand. Why were you so angry with me?" Instead of answering, she kissed him passionately and placed one hand against his chest. His body tensed up, and he wouldn't have been able to control himself had it not been for the uncertainty her anger had caused. She nuzzled his neck and whispered, "I'm sorry I was angry. How about I make it up to you, my darling fiancé?" He instantly forgave her and pushed the feelings of uncertainty and doubt aside. He allowed her to lead him into the bedroom and succumbed to her soft embrace. It was getting late, and Esther was hungry but didn't feel like getting up. "Why don't we order takeout?" Xavier stretched his arms and yawned. No, let's go out for lunch. He was sure she would see through his plan. They often got takeout after a moment of heated passion, but this time, he insisted they go out because he wanted to take her to the marriage license office before they missed their appointment. Esther rolled onto her back and looked at him helplessly. I don't have any energy left. Help me get dressed. Xavier's eyes lit up. He quickly put on his clothes and found her dress that had been thrown over an armchair. He usually didn't have the power to resist her beautiful figure as she lies stretched out on the bed, but this time he controlled himself and helped her dress. Once dressed, he picked her up and carried her to the couch to put a pair of shoes on her feet. She fell against the couch like a corpse. I can't walk. Carry me. He squatted down, ready to pick her up. She burst out laughing. He seemed willing to do anything to get her to the marriage license office. She smiled. I'm only joking. We have neighbors. They'll think we've gone mad. Come on, let's go have lunch. Afraid she would change her mind again, he held her hand firmly as they walked out. He had put all their paperwork in the car earlier that morning and quickly checked that it was still there before driving out of the parking garage. Esther pretended not to see it. Instead, she picked up her phone and sent Nancy a message saying the moment had arrived. He found a parking space in a small parking lot beside a burger joint. Esther smiled when she realized where they were. There's nothing like a good burger and fries for lunch. He grinned as if it had been his first choice. But the reality was that it was the closest restaurant to the marriage license office. Yeah, you're right. This place has the best burgers in town. Esther pointed to the building across the road. What's that building over there? I'm not wearing my contacts, so I can't see the name. Xavier didn't want to give anything away, so he pretended not to hear her and opened the door to the restaurant. A waiter greeted them and led them to a quiet table next to the window. It was hard to miss the name board on the building opposite them, but Xavier acted as if he hadn't noticed. Esther chuckled to herself and gushed over how cute her fiancé had become. She quickly hid behind her menu to stop him from seeing her smile. They ordered and waited for their food to arrive, but she noticed he kept checking the time on his phone. She looked out the window again and felt the excitement build up in her. Xavier wolfed his food down, and Esther cursed under her breath as she knew she would have to do the same. They ate quickly, and by the time they finished their meal, it was only a few minutes until their scheduled appointment at the marriage license office. Xavier had already paid the bill, and he stood up and put on his jacket. Esther could clearly feel his impatience as she followed him out of the restaurant. As they stepped onto the sidewalk, he seemed to be about to say something, but he stopped himself. Instead, he coughed a couple of times, and then he touched the pocket of his pants to make sure the 2 documents he had put there earlier were still in place. After confirming their presence, he took her hand. Babe, I just noticed that the building across the road is the marriage license office. We could still make our appointment. Why don't we go and get the marriage license now? He subconsciously loosened his shirt collar, and Esther sensed that he was nervous. She noticed that he was wearing a red tie. He had worn a blue one for Latham's wedding that morning. It was unusual for him to wear a bright color, and she knew he was up to something. Esther didn't reply, so Xavier tried again. You know, I've been hoping that we could get married as soon as possible. His tone sounded pitiful to Esther, and her heart softened. Come on, then. She pulled him toward the pedestrian crossing. I knew all along what you were up to. Esther's heart skipped a beat, and his eyes widened. My eyesight's not great, but I knew that was the office over there, she said. Xavier's throat tightened, and the excitement started to build up inside him. He couldn't speak, and he seemed to be fixed on the spot. She pulled on his hand. Let's go! Don't tell me you've suddenly gotten cold feet. No, absolutely not. He shook himself and came back to his senses. They crossed the road and almost ran into the license office. They were surprised to see that quite a number of people had had the same idea, and they had to wait their turn. They took a seat in the waiting room. Xavier held Esther's hand tightly and wouldn't let go. Esther began to feel nervous, and she started to bite the fingernails on her free hand. She looked around at the other people in the waiting room and wondered how they managed to all look so relaxed. She glanced at Xavier and nudged his arm with her elbow. "Why don't you look happy?" she asked anxiously. He smiled awkwardly, and she realized he was just as nervous as she was. She leaned toward him and kissed him on the cheek. He felt his heart skip a beat, and he wanted to wrap her in his arms, but he didn't like public displays of affection, so he simply gave her a broad smile. To take their minds off what was about to happen, they began talking about other things. They discussed Latham's wedding that hadn't happened and what Samantha had done, and then their number was called. They looked at each other nervously and made their way to the window. The clerk handed them the relevant paperwork, and they began to fill out the forms. Esther's nerves caused her hand to shake, so she passed the pen to Xavier to complete the form. She noticed that his hand didn't shake at all, and she guessed his nerves must have settled. They completed the paperwork and returned it to the clerk. And then they went to get some photos taken so they could remember the moment. The photographer got them to stand close together and tilt their heads so that they touched. The camera clicked many times, capturing the intimacy between them. "That's wonderful," the photographer said. "You both look so happy and relaxed. I particularly like your smile, sir." Later, when they viewed the photos on the photographer's computer screen, Esther saw what he meant when he mentioned Xavier's smile. In all of the images, his face beamed as she had never seen it before. And again, her heart melted at his obvious love for her. They were given a little red book containing prints of their photos, and they left the marriage license office clutching their book and their license to get married. Outside, Esther looked through the book from front to back and landed on her favorite image. "I've never seen you smile like this before," she said, pointing to the picture. "Show me another one like it." He beamed at her, showing all his front teeth, and she smiled back. "There it is," she said happily. "Happy pre-wedding, my wife." Esther gasped, and her heart beat faster. She liked the sound of being called his wife. It gave her a strange feeling inside. She felt the heat rush to her face with a flush. Xavier fixed his gaze on her face so that he could see her reaction, and he smiled at her blush. He waited for her to say something in return, but nothing was forthcoming. Eventually, he raised his hands into the air in a gesture of surrender. "Come on, babe. Don't you have anything to say to me?" "Happy almost wedding, honey." Xavier was dissatisfied with that response, and his face fell dramatically. He feigned despair. "Is that all you've got?" Esther laughed. "Happy pre-wedding, Xavier." His eyes bore into hers, and he pretended to burst into tears. He wasn't going to let it go until he achieved his goal. "Ooh, it's so hot today," she said, deliberately teasing him again. "Let's get back to the car." But Xavier stood firm. He placed his hand on her shoulder and wouldn't let her leave until she said what he wanted to hear. All right, she finally said. "I give in. Happy almost wedding, hubby." As soon as she uttered the word, her heart started to beat fast again. He pulled her into his arms. Hearing her say the word hubby melted his heart and made his whole body tremble. He had never felt so happy in his entire life. She felt hot in his arms, but she liked the feeling. She inhaled the faint scent of his cologne and snuggled into his chest. "It is hot," she whispered. "Come on." Xavier released her from his embrace, and taking her hand again, he led her to the parking lot. They sat in the car for a moment and looked at their marriage license. Then, Xavier turned Esther's face toward him and planted a passionate kiss on her lips. They kissed in the car for what felt like an eternity until the spell was broken by the sound of a horn coming from a nearby car. "That's impressive, dude," the driver from the car yelled from his open window. "You look like you've got quite the lady there," he chuckled. "But if you don't need that parking space anymore, how about you let someone else have it? You can kiss later." Esther blushed again, and Xavier shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He started the engine and pulled out of the parking space, waving his apology at the other driver. With the little red book in her hand, Esther flicked to her 2 favorite images, took a photo of them with her phone, and sent them to Nancy. As she sent the pictures through, a text came in from Nancy at the same time. "Great minds think alike," Esther thought with a smile, and then she read Nancy's message. "Hey Esther, did you get your license yet? We're about to go back in to interrogate Samantha." Samantha was tied to a chair in a locked windowless room, with Jonathan and Norman staring down at her. Jonathan gestured to Norman, and he offered her a spoonful of food, which she ate hungrily. Less than 10 minutes later, her entire body began to itch. It wasn't the kind of itch that came from an insect bite. It was the kind of itchy pain that burrowed deep into her bone marrow. The itch was unbearable. Samantha tried to scratch it on the edge of her chair, but it was useless. Jonathan watched her writhe around in agony. "I'll leave you to think about it, Samantha. We'll be back in a half an hour." He turned and headed for the door. "Wait," Samantha cried. "Don't go. I'll tell you whatever you want to know." The itching powder had made her speech slurred, and she sounded as if she were drunk. Jonathan stopped in his tracks. "Who sent you?" "It was Carmel. Carmel believed that Latham's company had threatened them, so—" "Let's go." Jonathan cut her off and signaled to Norman. Carmel was Latham's competitor, but it hadn't occurred to Jonathan that he would come up with a plan that would take a full 6 months to execute. Furthermore, they had used a talented woman to lure Latham into the trap. Samantha could see that Jonathan and Norman were eager to leave, but she really needed the itching to stop, and she needed them for that. Her hands had been immobilized, so she was unable to do it herself. She tried desperately to rub any part of her body that could reach the back of the chair in an attempt to relieve just a bit of the pain. Time seemed to stand still, and she began to wonder if she could hold on. Jonathan was obviously some kind of monster to willingly use such a debilitating kind of torture, and she was ready to give in and reveal all. She thought of the man that Arthur Williams had sent out. He was a man of steel in Cuba, but he had been putty in Jonathan's hands. As for Samantha, she felt a certain responsibility for her younger sister, who was being held against her will. She feared the man would do unspeakable things to her, and so Samantha felt that if she didn't confess, it would make things unbearable for her sister, and she might not even survive the ordeal. The thought of her sister's dire situation, together with the unbearable itching torture, forced Samantha to give up. "Mr. Davis, please," she cried in desperation. "I'll speak. I'll tell you everything." Jonathan and Norman slowly walked back to her. They looked at her with menacing eyes. Jonathan said, "You better not be wasting my time. I don't like time wasters. This is your last chance. I want to know everything." Samantha's heart sank. She looked up at Jonathan and tried hard to dispel her earlier thoughts. "All right, I'll tell you everything I know." She swallowed and took a deep breath. "I'm from the U.S., and a little over 6 months ago, a man from Cuba approached me. He had seen the mole on my face and told me to protect it well. After that, my life changed completely. He took my sister away, and I was taken to Cuba." Jonathan listened intently and studied her face to gauge whether she was telling the truth. "I received training in Cuba," she went on. "Really scary training. I was taught to fend for myself and let loose in a forest filled with lunatics. Was given a knife and told to do whatever it took to survive. Then they left me there." She took another deep breath as she recalled her dark past. "That was the first time I killed a person. For the next 3 months, I struggled to survive like that until that man brought me back to the U.S. Then, he arranged for me to work as a bartender and maid in a hotel and organized for some people I didn't know to pretend to be my parents. He visited me every few days and took pleasure in reminding me that I was just a dog under him. I worked at the hotel every day, and it was hell." She cleared her throat before going on. "But then he stopped contacting me, and every time he went more than a week without any word, I wondered if he'd forgotten about me. He trained me, but he never gave me any missions. But then, a month ago, he came to me and said that he was going to raise an army, and then he told me the plan. I was instructed to find a way to drug Latham when he came to the hotel on a business trip." She paused and took another deep breath. "And then I had to sleep with him. But something unexpected happened that day. The one who climbed into his bed wasn't me, but one of his female colleagues. Just as I was wondering what to do, I saw her leaving his room during the night, so I slipped in and got into bed beside him. After that, as you know, I pretended to be carrying Latham's child, and I asked him to take responsibility for it." "Who's the real father of your child?" Jonathan asked. "When I was working in the bar, I met a guy who was drinking there one night. I went to bed with him, but then he kept pestering me. He was taken away and thrown into the river, but somehow he survived. I don't know how. He even found out that Latham and I were getting married. That's why he came to me for money." Her next sentence was spoken with a hint of anger. "If it hadn't been for that guy, my plan would have worked." "Who's the woman who slept with Latham that night?" Jonathan asked. "The colleague." "I don't know," Samantha replied. "I only met him that day at their party, and I didn't meet her at all. But she was a beautiful-looking girl." Jonathan's heart sank. In that instance, everything he'd been unable to figure out seemed to fall into place. Maintaining his composure, he continued his interrogation. "Tell me who your handler is." "I don't know his name, but I heard one of his men call him Mr. Sander. But he wasn't the guy they sent to me 6 months ago. They told me that after I married Latham, they'd give me further instructions." At that moment, the penny dropped, and Jonathan finally understood. Samantha had been sent by Alexander, and it seemed that Alexander had started working on his plan some time ago. He had begun his plan to sabotage the brakes on the Davis Group vehicles 2 years ago, and more than 6 months ago, he had planned the plane crash. Just how many of Alexander's chess pieces are scattered around the place? Jonathan wondered. He had provided evidence of Alexander's crimes a few months ago, so he couldn't have been the one who picked Samantha up. Alexander had many loyal servants who had executed his plan for him, even if he were out of action. In addition to that, his people had helped him escape from prison once he had been taken back to Cuba from Brussels. Jonathan had no sympathy for the woman who had almost taken Latham's life, and he stared at Samantha in disgust. But she was carrying a child, and he wasn't the kind of person who could harm a pregnant woman. He instructed Norman to feed her the antidote to the itching powder, and then he waved his hand dismissively. "Send her overseas," he said to Norman. "I don't ever want to see her face around here again." Norman nodded and brought some people in to take Samantha away. Jonathan picked up his phone and called Latham. Latham ordered one of his men to escort his mother home from the hospital, and then he prepared to leave himself. He was curious to know how the interrogation with Samantha was going, and he took out his phone to call Jonathan. But before he could do so, a call came in from his assistant. His chest tightened as he answered the call. "Did you find anything?" "Yes, sir," the assistant replied. "I found out that Miss Porter had surgery in the hospital at the precise time you mentioned." Latham's heart sank. He clenched the phone tightly to his ear. "Give me the details." "She was picked up by an ambulance and taken to the emergency room. suffering from a hemorrhage caused by an ectopic pregnancy. No family members went with her, but the situation was critical, so the doctors performed emergency surgery to save her life. When she woke up, she should have stayed in the hospital for a week to recover, but she insisted on being discharged. And after only 2 days, she left. Latham listened intently as his assistant continued. I asked the hospital for her medical records. I told them I was a close friend, and since she had no immediate family listed, they gave it to me. If you need it, I can scan it and email it to you. Yes, do that, please, Latham replied. His throat was dry, and he found it a struggle to say just those few words. Sure, I'll get on that, his assistant said. He paused with an intake of breath, as if he wasn't sure how to say what he wanted to say next. The doctor said that no family members came to visit her while she was in the hospital, and because of that, he pulled me over to say a few words. Latham's ears pricked up. What did he say? He said it's terrible when vulnerable women are left to deal with such traumatic experiences alone. He paused to let his words sink in. Latham remained silent, so he went on. The doctor even said... He trailed off. Latham was anxious. What? What did he say? He said Miss Porter's boyfriend should be ashamed of himself for not taking responsibility for his part. He didn't even bother to visit his girlfriend after the surgery or offer to help her pay for it. Miss Porter had to pay all her expenses out of her own pocket. Latham gulped, and the saliva got stuck in his dry throat. The color drained from his face. He felt as if an invisible hand had reached into his chest and grabbed his heart. It really was her that night at the hotel, he thought. No wonder she was so angry when she saw me with Samantha at the hospital. She was pregnant with my child, and she lost it, alone. And there I was, accompanying that scheming woman to her own maternity checkup when her baby didn't even have anything to do with me. Oh, what Ashley must think of me. He wanted to slap himself hard for being so foolish. He ended the call with his assistant, and moments later, Ashley's hospital records arrived in his inbox. He scanned it, and the words, blood transfusion of 30 fluid ounces, caught his immediate attention. His head spun, and he felt sick. He leaned against the wall in the hospital corridor and didn't move for a long time, as a wave of cold sweat slowly rose from the soles of his feet to the tip of his head. When I saw her looking exhausted that day, I should have been more thoughtful, made sure she was okay, he thought with despair. Why didn't I stay and talk with her for longer? The poor woman went through hell, and I should have been there for her. She must have been so scared. Latham recalled the day when he had kissed her in the haystack. It felt so natural. He took out his phone and called Ashley again. She didn't pick up. He sent her a message instead. Ashley, where are you? We need to talk. He waited for a reply, but it didn't come. He sent another text. I'm not getting married. Still no response. He tapped another message. Call me when you see this. It's actually you that I want to be with. Ashley plugged her phone into the car charger and switched it on. Several text notifications sounded in quick succession. She had stopped at a red light, so she quickly took a look at the messages. But before she could even see who they were from, a man appeared at her window and thrust a piece of paper in her face. Do you want to buy a house, miss? He asked. Ashley closed the car window and threw the advertisement onto the passenger seat just as the traffic light turned green. She pressed her foot on the gas and drove off. There were no more incidences, and she sailed through a series of green lights until she reached a dark side street, and she realized she didn't know where she was going. She figured that Latham would be married already, and Jonathan and the others were all there, celebrating with him. She had planned to go herself, but she had realized that she couldn't face it, so she decided not to go. Even though she had long made up her mind to bury her past, reason was one thing, but feelings were quite another. Latham had been the love of her life, and he had betrayed her. She had even come close to death because of him. Ashley looked at the road ahead and slowed down. Just as she was wondering whether she should turn left or right, a car appeared behind her and crashed into the rear of her vehicle. Her head jolted forward with the impact, and she gasped with shock as the car came to a stop. The driver of the other vehicle got out and approached Ashley's car. The man was tall and slim, and she guessed he was in his mid-30s. He obviously fancies himself as a bit of a boy racer, she thought bitterly. She rolled down the window and said angrily, "You idiot!" "I'm sorry, miss," the man said. "I wasn't paying attention, and I take full responsibility. I'm happy to go through my insurance company." Ashley's initial impression of the man softened. He seemed to be taking the incident seriously and respectfully. So she nodded and was about to write down her details when the man sprayed pepper spray in her face. She gasped with shock and fear and tried desperately to put up her car window, but her eyes stung, and she couldn't see what she was doing. The man took advantage of her temporary blindness and panic and opened the car door. He grabbed her arm and pulled her roughly to the ground. Then, he picked her up, threw her over his shoulder, and bundled her into his own car. At the same time, a woman, who looked very much like Ashley, got out of the man's vehicle and stepped into the driver's seat of Ashley's car. The woman was dressed just like her and even wore her hair in the same style. She put on a pair of sunglasses and drove away. All the CCTV cameras in the vicinity had long been vandalized, and there were no witnesses, so nobody knew that a woman had been abducted and her place taken by an imposter. The two vehicles left the scene, one turned left while the other turned right. The SUV carrying Ashley headed toward the port, which was a hive of activity. Ashley's kidnapper bundled her into an oversized suitcase and boarded a ship bound for Cuba. He had obviously carried out such a task before, because he knew exactly how to avoid the customs check, making sure his suitcase didn't go through the baggage scanner. Latham tried calling Ashley again, but she didn't pick up. He had called multiple times and had sent several text messages. He assumed that she must be still angry with him and was deliberately ignoring his attempts to communicate. As he got into his car, he decided to go directly to the hospital that Ashley had been to and speak with the doctor who had operated on her. Latham's assistant had told her the whole story of what had happened to Ashley, but he felt he needed to hear it from the doctor, just in case his assistant had missed something. But just as before, he felt as if his heart was being twisted and pulled from his body. When he first met Ashley, he had only been slightly attracted to her, but as time had gone on, his feelings for her had grown. But then Samantha had come along and claimed that he was the father of her unborn baby. He had had no choice but to take responsibility for that. Deep down, though, it was Ashley that he wanted. He hadn't been able to stop thinking about her. When he was at work, he struggled to concentrate, as thoughts of her kept creeping into his mind. When he went home, he wished she was lying beside him in bed. And then, they had seen each other again, and he had been unable to resist kissing her. He had known then that he was more than just a little taken by her, and it had felt good, because she clearly felt the same way about him. If it hadn't been for that terrible mistake, they might have been together for good. Would she have agreed to marry me? He wondered sadly. Even though it was summer, Latham felt a chill permeate his body, and it hurt to breathe. If only I knew why she left, he thought, and why she didn't respond when I probed her the next day. He walked out of the hospital in a daze. His phone rang, and it took him a moment to realize it was Jonathan. "Hey," he said into the phone. "Where the hell are you?" Jonathan's voice was filled with anger. "I'm just leaving the hospital. Did Samantha spill her guts yet?" "Yes, I'm on my way home now. I want you to come by my place before you go home." Jonathan seemed to be struggling to control his emotions, and Latham was careful not to irritate him further. "Sure, I'll be there as soon as I can." He got into his car and drove to Jonathan's villa. Nancy had been back at the house for some time, and she was serving up dinner when her husband arrived home with a face like thunder. She sensed that he was in a bad mood. "What's up?" she asked cautiously. "Did something happen?" Seeing his wife softened Jonathan's anger somewhat. "It's fine. It's about Latham, that's all. Don't worry about it." Oh. Nancy got the message that he wasn't in the mood to talk about it, so she didn't push the matter. Instead, she pulled him toward the table. "Come on, let's eat, and then maybe I can help you deal with it afterward." They ate their meal in silence and had just finished when the doorbell rang. It was Latham. "Follow me to the shooting range," Jonathan said to him without bothering with any pleasantries. He noticed the red scratches on Latham's face. Latham did what he was told and followed Jonathan to the shooting range. He had no idea what was going on, and he felt a little uncomfortable. "I hope you're not going to abuse your power. I know Samantha deserves to pay, but she is pregnant. I don't want to be the ones with blood on our hands because of the likes of her." Jonathan gave him a cold, hard look. "Is that so?" Latham was a touch scared by the crazed look in his eyes. He had known Jonathan for years, but he had never seen him look like that before. He looked like a man with a life-threatening score to settle. While Latham tried to imagine what was going through Jonathan's mind, they arrived at the shooting range. Latham looked around, half expecting to find Samantha there, but there was no sign of her. In fact, they had the whole place to themselves. He looked at Jonathan suspiciously. "What's this about?" Jonathan walked to the store cupboard and took out 2 guns. He set up a moving target and a fixed target, and then he handed one of the guns to Latham. "Hit the fixed target." Latham tentatively took the gun and tried to dispel the uncertain feelings in his guts. "Are you giving me target training right now?" Jonathan ignored his question. "There are 10 bullets in that gun. Hit the fixed target." Latham didn't know what Jonathan was thinking, but he guessed that he must have upset him in some way. He cocked the gun, but before he had time to shoot, Jonathan had already opened fire on the moving target. He fired carefully and calmly, but there was something about his composure that terrified Latham. Hitting a moving target was challenging, but Jonathan managed to hit 3 consecutive top scores. Latham aimed his gun at the fixed target. Shooting, riding, and playing cards were how most wealthy young men got their entertainment, so he knew how to shoot. But he had never had the desire to shoot for pleasure. He pulled the trigger and scored a straight 10 points. Jonathan went again. His face was tight with concentration, and Latham wondered again what he could possibly have done to make him so angry. Latham was so preoccupied with that thought that he lost concentration, and his next 2 shots missed the target. In the booth beside him, Jonathan finished his 10 rounds. Every one of them hit the bullseye. He was like a professionally trained killing machine. Latham felt a trickle of cold sweat run down his forehead as he lined up his aim. His next few shots hit the target, but only one hit the bullseye. He put down the pistol, and his heart pounded in his chest. Jonathan dismantled his gun in the blink of an eye, and then he disabled Latham's. The bullet shells made a loud clattering noise as they bounced off the concrete floor. He returned the equipment to the cupboard and locked it without saying a word. He did something on his phone, and then he stood face to face with Latham with his hands on his hips. "Looks like you lost," he said. Latham wondered what was coming next, but he chose to say nothing. "I'm thinking about how I can teach you a lesson," Jonathan continued. He fixed his gaze on the scratch on Latham's cheek, as if he was hoping it would give him inspiration. Latham's fear gripped his insides. "What happened to you, Jonathan? What have I done to piss you off so much?" "You seriously don't know?" Jonathan gave him an incredulous look, and then glanced again at the swollen red mark on Latham's face that Samantha had given him. When Ashley came to work for your company, what did I say to you? Latham's heart thumped. Jonathan had interrogated Samantha, and she was bound to have said something about Ashley going to his room with him. Samantha didn't know Ashley, but Jonathan wasn't stupid. You're right, Latham conceded. It's all my fault. I'm sorry. Ashley's the one you should be apologizing to. I've just informed Brock. Latham's heart leapt into his mouth. I had thought that if you beat me at shooting targets, or even if we tied, I wouldn't let him know. Jonathan continued, but unfortunately for you, you gave up your chance. Jonathan and Latham had been friends since they were young, and even though Jonathan wanted to attack Latham, he didn't because of their history. Latham knew that his friend wouldn't physically harm him, but he hadn't expected him to get Brock involved. He wondered what kind of relationship Ashley had with Brock. Apart from the blood that tied them together as half-siblings, they also had more than 20 years of each other's company. They had grown up together, so it was highly likely they were close. He had let Ashley down. It was only right that her two brothers would stand up for her. The atmosphere between him and Jonathan was stilted as they stared at each other in silence. Jonathan made the first move. Patting Latham on the shoulder, he said, Ashley's biological parents are no longer with us, as you know. I asked you to take care of her. What you did wasn't exactly what I had in mind. Latham opened his mouth to speak, but Jonathan stopped him. Since you obviously don't care that much for her, you need to sever all contact with her as soon as possible. It's the best thing for both of you. You didn't even tell me the truth when I asked you about Samantha. Jonathan's voice began to rise. If you had said that you had doubts about her, we could have investigated, and we wouldn't be in this position now. His face turned red, and he loosened his collar. I would have thought that considering what you've been through, you'd know how to treat a woman properly. That's why I let Ashley go to work for you in the first place. Latham felt that he deserved whatever was coming to him, and he stood in silence and let Jonathan have his rant. I can see that she seems to have some feelings for you. Jonathan went on. I thought that if you could take care of her, the two of you might end up getting together, and I thought that would be good for her. After all, you and I go back a long way. He took a step closer to Latham and locked eyes with him. But this is how you repay me. Latham shook his head and took a step back. No, it's not like that. I actually really like her, but I never had the chance to tell her. Jonathan was taken aback, but Latham's words seemed to make him even angrier. So you realize your feelings only after you'd lost her? Is that it? No, I've been trying to call Ashley all day, but she hasn't been answering. I know I let her down. I wanted to apologize to her face and ask her for another chance, but she won't speak to me. Jonathan rubbed his temples and paced back and forth. You can explain all of this to Brock when he gets here. He tapped something into his phone. Jonathan had never contacted Brock before, so Brock was surprised to receive a message from him. They had never had much to do with each other, so he wondered what he wanted to see him about. He feared it might have something to do with Ashley, so as he arrived at Jonathan's villa, he called her to make sure she was okay. He waited for her to pick up, but there was no answer, and his call eventually went to voicemail. He was about to leave a message, but before he had a chance, Norman met him at the door and escorted him to the back garden, where Latham and Jonathan were waiting for him. Outside on the lawn, the three men stood together, talking. Nancy watched through the window and wondered what they were talking about. She saw Latham say something to Brock, and then Brock lurch forward and grab him by the collar. Nancy gasped. The men's voices rose, and it wasn't long before the three of them started fighting. Latham felt guilty about a lot of things, but mainly the fact that Ashley had come close to death in the hospital and had endured the loss of his baby alone. She had always been strong and in good health, but then she had had surgery for an ectopic pregnancy and had gone back to work way too soon. As if it wasn't enough, Mr. Edwards had told him that she had stood for 2 days in the rain outside his house for the benefit of Latham and his company, and that had happened soon after she had lost the baby. No wonder she had seemed more listless than usual. Anyone would feel that way after having gone through what she had endured. Latham thought about her refusal to answer his calls and wondered if she might be sick. What if she's got a fever at home and no one's there to take care of her because Brock and Jonathan are both right here? He thought. He pushed Brock away and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. Is Ashley sick? Brock had been about to attack again, but he stopped in his tracks. She got drenched in the rain yesterday, Latham continued. She only came home this morning. I've been trying to call her, but she won't pick up. Brock wanted to knock Latham's lights out, but his sister's health and safety were more important. Instead, he took out his phone and dialed Ashley's number. The call went to voicemail, and he hung up. It wasn't like Ashley to ignore Brock's calls, and a brief look of fear flashed across his face. Jonathan noticed the look, and he also tried calling Ashley, but the outcome was the same. The three men all looked at each other in turn, unsure what to do next. Jonathan made the first move. Turning to Norman, he said, "Find out where Ashley is." Norman nodded and went off on his mission. All three men continued to reach Ashley for several more minutes, but to no avail. "I'll go home and see if she's there," Brock said, and he headed to his car. "I've already checked," Norman said. He had just arrived back at the house to update Jonathan on what he had found out. "She's not there. She went out 2 hours ago and hasn't come back yet. I got someone to check the security cameras." Jonathan had a bad feeling in his stomach. The first thought that came into his mind was, could my mad cousin be behind this? But then he remembered that Samantha didn't know who Ashley was, so it was unlikely that Alexander would think to target her. Jonathan had made sure that he had never announced her identity as his half-sister to the public in order to keep her safe. As his thoughts filled his mind, Norman brought another piece of news. "Sir, I've just found out that Ashley has been seen driving around the city." Jonathan felt the tension in his stomach ease a little, but he still couldn't relax. Nancy joined the men in the garden. She'd been watching the interaction between them for some time and could see that something was wrong. "What's going on?" she asked. Jonathan explained the situation to her. "I'll see if I can contact her," she said, and she headed back inside the villa to get Zara, her robot. She had once designed a similar robot for Ashley, and she was able to use Zara to communicate it with via the internet. Ashley's model could receive satellite signals, so as long as there was a viable signal, her robot would be able to share its location with Zara. Moving as quickly as she could, Nancy turned on the location sharing app and instantly saw a small dot of light flashing on Zara's screen. The light didn't move and seemed to show that Ashley's robot had stopped on an outer ring road more than 50 miles away from the city center. "I know Ashley keeps her robot in the car," Nancy said. "So I think the flashing light that's showing up on Zara's screen must be the location of her car." She sent the location to Jonathan's phone. Jonathan sent some people to search the vicinity, and 10 minutes later, he got a message from one of his men. "Boss, we found the car, but it looks like it's been abandoned. Look for any signs of damage on the car and see if there are any suspicious tracks or signs around it." Jonathan was distraught. The man who had found Ashley's car was silent for a moment as he inspected the car's body panels. "There's not much damage except for at the rear. The bumper is smashed, and the paintwork has deep scratches." He sent Jonathan a photograph of the damage. Jonathan hung up and immediately dialed Jack's number. "Check the surveillance cameras in the area." He was convinced that something bad had happened to her, and he knew that even though the surveillance cameras might show them something, it was still too late to find Ashley. They had missed their opportunity. Nancy suddenly had an idea. There was a small tracking device in Ashley's car. The tracker would have recorded all of her movements. She ran over to Jonathan. Tell your man to look inside the car for a tracking device. It's a small device that looks like a car air freshener. They must video call me as soon as they find it, and I'll tell them how to use it." The men had already opened the car. Any documents that had been inside were gone, but they found the device hanging from the rearview mirror. It looked like a cute little animal of some sort. They contacted Nancy, and she explained how to open a small control panel on the device. She gave the passcode to activate the remote link to the device and relayed the stored data back to her laptop. Within seconds, they had accessed Ashley's entire journey. The data showed the time she had left home that morning, which route she had taken, and even how long she had waited at the traffic lights. The thumb looked at the timestamp of when she had left home, and it felt like he had been hit on the head. It was the same time that he had gone to see her. His heart sank when he realized they might have even driven past one another. Nancy quickly began to analyze the data. Jonathan and Brock were on their phones while the thumb stared at the computer screen. When Jonathan finished his call, Nancy turned the screen toward him. "This shows her journey and the route she took." Nancy pointed to the markers on the screen. "You can see she drove from her house and stopped at several red traffic lights. This mark shows that she stopped at another intersection for longer than the time at the red traffic lights. I checked the map, and that area has a lot of foot traffic at the intersection, so it would make sense that she waited for pedestrians to cross." Nancy then pointed to 3 different markers, and no residential areas or stores along the way. "I suspect the possible accident that damaged her car occurred at one of these 3 spots." Jonathan took a deep breath. "Good work. Okay, send the coordinates of those 3 places to me. I'll arrange for someone to check out the surveillance camera footage." Slowly but surely, information began to trickle in. The footage of the first 2 stops didn't show anything unusual. Ashley had pulled over but never gotten out of the car, nor had she been approached by any suspicious people. Details from the last stop gave them the breakthrough they had hoped for. It was one of the auxiliary routes that led out of the city toward the harbor. The surveillance cameras near where she had stopped had been out of order for some time, but Jonathan wasn't deterred. "We need to look at footage from other surveillance cameras on that route. Focus on all vehicles that were on that section of the road around the time Ashley stopped." It took time to look through the footage. Some cars had turned off in the direction of a nearby mall, and others had taken the exits that led to a residential area a few miles away. But an SUV that had driven toward the harbor attracted their attention. It had been following Ashley's car. There was a break in the footage, and then they saw the SUV ahead of her car, and it sped toward the harbor. Jonathan zoomed in on Ashley's car and gasped when he noticed something they hadn't seen before. Ashley had been wearing a white shirt, but she hadn't been wearing sunglasses. The driver in her car looked similar, but wore sunglasses, and their hair looked slightly lighter in color. Jonathan called Brock to take a closer look. After observing the footage carefully, Brock exclaimed, "That's not Ashley. I know my sister well enough to tell that's someone else." The truth had finally come to light. Jonathan narrowed his eyes. "Someone crashed into her. I think they kidnapped her and put her into the SUV. A decoy driver took her car and pulled over where we found her car as if there had been an accident." Nancy gasped as she realized they had been duped. Scowling, Jonathan slammed his fists on the table. "They must have put her on a boat to Cuba." He quickly sent a text to Jack. Shortly after, Jack sent a reply. "It's confirmed. There was a boat headed for Cuba. It set sail shortly after the SUV raced ahead of Ashley's car." Jonathan looked at his watch. A few hours had passed since Ashley had been kidnapped. It was likely that the boat had headed into the open ocean and had been met by a speedboat to get Ashley across faster. It took several hours to reach Cuba by boat. It would be too late, even if he tried to catch up by helicopter. He wondered who had kidnapped her. He immediately suspected Alexander, Oliver, and Matthew. Any one of those 3 could have been responsible. Brock saw the dark expression in Jonathan's eyes. Do you know where she's being taken to? Jonathan picked up his phone and began to search for a contact number. Let me handle this. He waited a few seconds for the call to be answered before saying, Matthew, I need to speak with you urgently. On the other end of the line, Matthew sounded indifferent. Jonathan, it's good to hear from you. What's the matter? Jonathan's face was red with anger. Don't pretend as if you don't know. We figured it out. It wasn't too difficult using my wife's technology. He wasn't sure if Matthew had been involved, but he had no choice but to approach him head-on. Matthew replied, just as Jonathan had hoped. You're always full of surprises and tricks. Well done. He paused momentarily before continuing. I'm getting old now. I need to get my affairs in order. Jonathan didn't respond. Matthew spoke slowly. I recently discovered that my brother had a daughter he never told me about. I didn't know I had a niece in America. I wanted to meet her, so I invited her to visit. Don't worry, I'll send her back. Eventually. Jonathan's hand tightened around his phone. Matthew, you, of all people, should know not to provoke me like this. Jonathan was fiercely protective over his family and wouldn't let anything or anyone cause them harm. Matthew smirked. Calm down. You're being dramatic. You know that you'll take over from me soon enough. I'll give you everything. There's nothing to worry about. Ashley seems like a sensible woman. She's flying in by helicopter now, so I haven't met her yet. I've seen her photo, and she bears a striking resemblance to your father. Jonathan frowned. You better send her back. Of course. Relax now. I can't guarantee you'll get to see her if you come to Cuba. You're a smart guy. You know what I mean. Matthew chuckled to himself.